Arch Advocate Podcast, Tuesday, April 16th. Notre Dame burned down. Notre Dame burned down, man. That is truly sad news. There's going to be a lot of conspiracy theories. Oh, the Muzzies, they probably burned it down. Well, maybe. Maybe. I mean, it's too early to tell. There's been a lot of vandalism of historic churches in Europe, particularly France, of late. Maybe. And before we get into that, look, that building was made out of wood. That wood has been sitting there aging for 800 years. Very nearly 800 years, and in some cases more than 800 years, because it took 200 years to build it. And that's, that construction started 900 years ago. So anyways, I mean, it's kind of a miracle that it hasn't already happened. And then it didn't happen, 50 years ago or 100 years ago or whenever they started, putting electricity in that building. I'm not against, listen, this is why it's sad. It's, when you have beautiful things that cannot be replaced, you can't build Notre Dame again. If you do, you could build it out of wood. You could build it using the same construction, the same plans and everything. You could build it again, but you still wouldn't replace it. That building was started by men who knew that neither themselves nor their sons nor their grandchildren would see its completion. The men who began construction on that building knew, we're never going to see the end of this. And it was built out of a sense of, it was built in a time when Europeans were changing everything. Everything was changing because of the approach that people took. Architecture, the knowledge of architecture completely changed. But it wasn't just that. It was also music, and also literature, and also food preparation. Everything changed. Everything became a work of art. And so that's a little bit different, because you can go look at the Taj Mahal, right? Go look at the Taj Mahal and think, well, this is a beautiful thing that was not born out of Christianity, right? It is an architectural wonder of the world. You can go look at the pyramids. Again, that was not born. That wasn't created because of the influence of Christianity on Egypt. Same as the Taj Mahal. Same as those buildings in China. That were built out of the dynasties. There's a number of them. And I mean, going down into Vietnam and Laos and Cambodia and all those places, there's all kinds of these temples that are, man, they're works of art, and they were not born out of Christianity. So somebody who doesn't know anything could look at Notre Dame. They can look at the church there in Cologne, Germany, big black church. I've been to that. That took nearly 1,000 years to build, by the way. I've been there. You can look at all these different places that are outside of Europe and think wow, that's really magnificent. And somebody could look at the ones in Europe and say, well, what's the difference, right? Well, the difference is in India, when they built the Taj Mahal, it was the only thing that was revolutionized. Their knowledge of architecture, that statement, or you can go I've said this before, King Herod, who was king of the southern kingdom, right? In Jerusalem at the time of Christ, who was a crazy person. He was a legitimate, if you go into the history of that guy, he was a paranoid, schizophrenic, crazy person. Probably because of inbreeding. But he was also a next level genius when it came to architecture. Next level stuff. I mean to tell you that King Herod is still taught to this day. Because he was on some next level stuff. Where it's like, if you want to learn architecture, if you go off to university to get your master's in architecture, so that's what you can do with your career, you're going to learn Herod. Because you have to. Not born out of Christianity. But Notre Dame was. And St. John's Basilica in Tours, France. Westminster Abbey. You know, these buildings. The stuff that they have that in Lourdes, that place with the miracle with the two girls, whatever. Why do I say that was born out of Christianity? Well, because everything in Europe was changing simultaneously. The knowledge of architecture, the knowledge of music, the knowledge of the written word, the knowledge of food preparation, culinary sciences, if you will, all of it was changing. Fashion, the clothes that you wore, your city planning, everything changed. Everything changed all at once. Now, why is that important? Well, because you got to look at who those people were before it changed. France was called Gaul, right? Those were the Gauls. And then there was, and then you get into, the rest of Europe and the Visigoths and the Ostrogoths and the barbarians and the Vikings and dude, Europe was full of just savages. By that word, that word savage, it's kind of taken on a sort of a compliment. Somebody calls you, just like, man, you're a savage. It's like, that's almost a compliment. Let me look up savage for you. Give you the actual. Come on, I don't. See, I can't even. I can't even. Meaning. One of the options was savage AF meaning. No, I don't want that. Urban Dictionary, savage meaning, Cambridge Dictionary. Savage meaning extremely violent, wild, or frightening, as in a beast. Cruel, severe, these are verbs, adjectives. Now, a person whose way of life is at a very early stage of development. There's a reason why, when the early people came over, Columbus and on downward, the people who came to the Americas were like, man, this place is full of savages. Because that word savage meant these people have not graduated to the place of figuring out the wheel out of necessity. Right? To call somebody a savage meant that they were they just weren't developed. They were animals. To call somebody a savage is to call them a human beast. It's a huge insult. I mean, now it's dude, I went to the gym, man. I got in such a good workout, man. And, I finally bench pressed, 1,000 pounds. It's like, oh, you savage. You know what I mean? It's it's complimentary, but that's not what that word means. To call somebody a savage is to call them an animal. A filthy animal. That's what Europe was. Full of savages. Unwashed, disease-ridden. I've said this a number of times before. That word barbarian, the barbarians, right? The Germans. The reason they were called barbarians was because the enlightened people of Italy and Greece went north, and they were like, these people's language is so crazy, it sounds like they're just saying bar, 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 bar. And so they were called barbarians. Because they were savages, right? So all of Europe was savages, and then the next thing you know, Christianity comes up from the south, and the next thing you know, you've got William Shakespeare. Right? The next thing you know, Christianity comes up from the south, and the next thing you know, you've got the Dome in Cologne, Germany. You've got Notre Dame, however you want to pronounce it, Frenchy. Right? You have the Cordon Bleu. You have advancements in achievement when it comes to making wine. There's all these changes and they all happen at once, and it's because of the effect of Christianity. And how can you say that? You can look at me, how can you say that? I mean, everybody had advanced architecture. Clearly, King Herod had it. That was, King Herod was obviously before Christ because Christ was born during Herod's reign. And the Asian peoples had huge advancements in architecture, and Indians, people from India, had huge advancements in architecture. Yeah, but they never had everything happening simultaneously. When those people went through their, I don't know if you would call it like a reformation of education, where they all of a sudden they just knew stuff about architecture because they sat around and they just thought about it all the time. It was the only thing that changed. And they weren't going from just severe savagery to enlightened, where it's like, a rose by any other name. You know what I mean? Let's build the Cologne Dome, to which people still study to this day when they think about building other high-rise buildings. When they built the Empire State Building, all of those architects, they all went to Germany. They all went to Cologne and they studied the dome to learn how to build the Empire State Building. That is the truth. That's a fact. So we didn't just lose a historic building. It would be like if the Taj Mahal was destroyed. And if that happened, I would weep. Because it's an important building. Yes, it belongs to the filthy Hindus. But that doesn't matter. It's a beautiful building that's been there for a long time, and we need it. In a sense, it belongs to all of us now. I would be upset if somebody took a bulldozer and knocked over one of the stones at Stonehenge. Egypt is a complete crap hole, and I would be sad if somebody accidentally, crashed a plane into one of the pyramids and knocked it over. I would be sad. Those are achievements. Those are all things that remind us how far we've come. And when the church of Notre Dame burns down, I don't care. I do care, but it's like at this point, it doesn't matter if it was set on fire by Muslims or by right-wing extremists or yellow vests or Macron's puppets, or it doesn't, that's secondary. We've lost something. We lost something yesterday that can never be replaced. Even if you built it exactly the way it was built before, and built it out of the same forest that they took the trees, it doesn't matter. It's like lost money. Well, I can make that money back. No, you can't. You can make more money in the future, but you can never replace what was lost. And we just lost something that had 1,000 years of history. 1,000 years of history is gone. And again, in a sense, it was almost supposed to happen. I'm surprised that it didn't already. You've got something that's built out, it's completely built out of wood. And that wood it's been drying out for 1,000 years. That is some dry wood. So it's kind of surprising. In 1,000 years, not one a lit cigarette was accidentally tossed into a trash can that had a bunch of watered up paper in it. There hasn't been, in the 100 plus years of having, electricity in buildings, there hasn't been a single shortage, a wire crossing, a wire getting old, copper catching on fire, hot copper melting through The insulated stuff around it dripping onto the floor, catching fire, nothing. I mean, that's kind of impressive if you really think about it. A building made out of 1,000-year-old wood has not yet burned down. That's kind of amazing. So in a sense, it's like, wow, I mean, if you do the math, I mean, this was bound to happen eventually if you didn't just close the whole damn place down. You know what I mean? Like, they were still using that building as a utility. They were still holding mass there. There's people in and out of that regular folks. Like, I'm not talking about historians and curators and people like that. I'm talking about regular, go to work every day kind of people. So at this point, it's like, I mean, if they come out tomorrow and they say, oh, we found the guy who lit the fire. He's a Muslim and he's with ISIS and he has a tattoo of Ilhan Omar on his dick. You know, I'd be like, well, I mean, I guess. Yeah, that's bad. But, I mean, that place was going to burn down eventually if they didn't change their ways, you know? Like, if you go to, if you go to the museum, I've been to, what's that, there in Los Angeles, the Getty, which, by the way, I strongly recommend. I've been to the Getty. You go to the top of this mountain that you have to take a tram to get up to. By the way, I hate Los Angeles. Born and bred. Like, San Diegans and Los Angelinos, we don't get together. We're not friends. But in defense of Los Angeles, like, the Getty Museum is where you got to be. You can go there and you can stand right in front of Rembrandts. You know? Gauguins and Matisse and, like, you can stand and reach out, and if you really wanted to be a jerk, like, you could stick your finger on the canvas of a Rembrandt and ruin it. But there's people around, like there's people around. They have it sectioned off. I'm surprised that they haven't done that with that building. It's so old and it's made out of wood, Like, you go to the Cologne Dome, and it's like, yeah, there's some wood in there, but it's mostly steel and stone. The pyramids aren't going to burn down. It's sad. It's sad to watch that, and I think you should be sad. Like, it's kind of one of those things where it's just like, well, I'm not going crazy. I'm just mourning. We all lost something yesterday. And it's never going to be, it can never be replaced. But on the other hand, or I shouldn't say on the other hand, but I should say, like, at the same time, France in particular has been, this postmodernism, it comes out of France. It's weird, but it does. It comes out of mostly French and a little bit of German intellectualism. By the way, postmodernism by itself cannot be defined. There's no one definition of what postmodern. It just means after the modern era, right? It doesn't really mean anything. Don't let the irony be lost there. The phrase postmodernist or postmodernism doesn't actually mean anything. Which is funny because that's exactly what they teach. Meaninglessness. Which was a big thing for France. Right? We went through hundreds of years as Western European people. Over 1,000 years. Very nearly, I don't know, you could make the case for 1,700 years. Or, I guess you have to subtract a couple. Hold on. Sorry, I had to sneeze. So about 300 years after Christ is kind of when it all started, right? You had Constantine, and then, then you got the spread of Christianity, and then that kind of turned into, later on it was the Crusades, and then all this other stuff happened. But, like, we went through, Europeans, we went through kind of a great deal of turmoil to get to where we got. And all of that turmoil ended up because of industriousness and innovation and, figuring out like the elements and using those elements for different things and whatever. It put Europe in a distinctively powerful position, a position of ruling the world through economics, right? But with this newfound power came abuse, and there were some people that felt a certain way about that. But we grew up to such a degree that we kind of figured out how to avoid diseases and how to get around famines and that sort of thing. We became very successful, and that success lent itself to men and women being able to have enough time to just sit around and think about stuff. And some of the things that they thought about, well, I guess there is no God, because, there's really nothing, it used to be, famine was a way of God punishing people. Well, we figured out that famine is actually just, mismanagement of land, and we can figure this out, whatever. So really there is no God, and God is dead, By the way, you should read that whole thing that he wrote when Nietzsche wrote God is Dead. Because he wasn't bragging. He wasn't just saying some empty stuff. He was saying, the whole quote goes, God is dead and we've killed him, and there will never be enough water to wash the blood from our hands. That wasn't some boastful, prideful thing he was saying. He was lamenting the fact that we had removed God from our hearts. That's actually, it's pretty crazy. And that's all of this stuff. And what Nietzsche said when he said God is dead, and that whole quote, the whole thing that he wrote that included those words, God is dead, that's all meaninglessness. That's all a result of meaninglessness. That's what postmodernism is. It's the pursuit of meaninglessness. And it's almost exclusively a French idea, and the French people embraced it. Oh, look at us. Look how smart we are. It's like that pride, right? Because the French, they're a very proud people. That pride, oh, see, we're the smart people. We have forsaken God. Aren't we the smart people? Look how smart we are. And they've become so smart. They've, what's his name? He said, we have educated ourselves into imbecility. Gosh darn it, who was that guy? I forget. That's what France did. They educated themselves into imbecility. And that's where they are now. That as the French people watch as their own government tears down their chapels that were built 1,200 years ago, 500 years ago, 800 years ago. They say, oh, we need to remove this building that was built during the Renaissance or during the Enlightenment, during whatever period. We need to tear this down, and we need to put some shitty thing that's built out of the Bauhaus school, where it's all just built on efficiency and there's no art in it. There's nothing artistic about this. And so we need to tear down this art. And there are no laws to protect it. Here's one weird thing. In America, it's a little bit different. Let me tell you guys a story. MCRD, that stands for Marine Corps Recruit Depot. MCRD San Diego. There's two MCRDs. There's one in San Diego and the other one is in North Carolina. Parris Island. MCRD San Diego's been there for over 100 at this point, over 130 years, I think, at this point. No. Yeah, right around that. Before I joined the Marine Corps, see, MCRD San Diego is right next door, and not metaphorically, but literally it's on the same property line as the San Diego airport. The San Diego airport is kind of a big problem, right? Because like when they built it, and it's called Lindbergh Field, by the way, but when they built it, it was like airplanes were like brand new. And the idea of flying a vehicle that goes 500 miles an hour was ridiculous to the people that built it. So when they built it, it became very inefficient. It's a very inefficient airport. It's a very dangerous airport. Because everybody that tries to land a plane on that airport, at that airport, they have to fly directly over people's like condominiums and apartments as they're descending to the strip, right? It's very inefficient. So for a long time, the people who own the airport have been trying to figure that problem out. They need more land to do it, and there's only one place to get it. There's only one thing other than building out into the ocean, which is a kind of a different proposition altogether. But the only other thing that they can do is buy the neighboring land, which is MCRD San Diego. It's a beautiful campus. It's where I went to boot camp. It's a beautiful campus, and it's all these. If you've ever been to a different country and visited a U.S. embassy, you may have noticed it's all yellow. It's got this weird yellow paint. That's the color of MCRD, and it's very well manicured. You know, the landscaping's very beautiful and whatever. And those buildings have been there for over 100 years. And the Department of Defense, or whoever it is that makes those decisions, they actually decided to sell that land to the airport. This went on in the late 1980s, very early 1990s. In fact, I think it was 1990 on the dot that this was settled, and the government tried to sell the land. They tried to sell that campus to whoever it is that owns that airport. I'm assuming it's a conglomerate of all the different airline companies. It went through. It was approved. But then a group of Marines got together. A bunch of San Diego Marines, people that lived in San Diego and had previously served in the Marine Corps. They got together and they said, well, listen, the thing is, the law says if it is a building that's over 100 years old and has any sort of historical value, it cannot be taken down. You can sell it, but then the new owners are not legal. They're not allowed to legally tear those buildings down. And they went to court. And the judge said, yes, this is a proper interpretation of the laws surrounding historic landmarks. Let me tell you something. That is if you ever go to San Diego, when you're driving to the airport and you're looking for the Sassafras exit, which will kind of make you giggle if you've never seen it before. If you look to your right, you'll see MCRD San Diego. That's the reason why that campus is still there, is because a group of Marines got together and said, well, you can sell it all you want, but you can't use it. So, hey, San Diego Airport, there's really no point in you buying it, is there? Because there's nothing you're going to be able to do with that land. Can't tear those buildings down. Like, we have these laws in America. You're not allowed, if it's 100 years old and it has any sort of historical relevance, like MCRD San Diego that produces Marines, and all kinds of famous Marines graduated from there, and it's part of the history of San Diego. It's like, listen, this has historical value. You can't tear it down. Evidently, France doesn't have any laws like that because they're tearing down these chapels left and right. These chapels that were built during a time, and this is what I was getting at earlier. Why is it that Europe, all of the sudden, and it is very, like, if you look at the 2,000-year history of Eastern and Western Europe, after Christ and the spread of Christianity into Europe, these people go from savage barbarians to Mozart, right? They go from savagery to Rembrandt, and Shakespeare. They go from savagery to writing the Magna Carta. And the transition is almost instantaneous. They went from savagery to inventing the printing press. Let me tell you something about the printing press. There was a really funny little bit. Do you remember that movie, The Day After Tomorrow, with Dennis Quaid, or Dennis Miller, or Dennis the Menace? Who was it that was in that movie? The Dennis guy. Remember that? And they were in that building in New York, and the atheist guy. There was the atheist guy. He was like a professor or something, and he had chosen to protect this Bible. And they were asking him, like, why are you? I thought you were an atheist. I thought you didn't believe in any of that hokey religious stuff. He's like, yeah, I am an atheist, but this is a Gutenberg Bible. This is an original Gutenberg Bible. And this was the very first thing off of the printing press when it was invented. This was the first thing this machine that Europeans made 500 years ago. That was 500 years ago, not very long ago. That machine ushered in a new age for humanity. It ushered in a new age. It was a whole new age now, where if you wanted to learn how to read and just read any book that you wanted, you could, because all they had to do was print you one. That was amazing. That came out of Germany 500 years ago. And just 1,000 years prior to that, those same people were being called barbarians. So they went from being animals to enlightening the entire world with this device that they had made called the printing press. And I thought that was such a beautiful scene in that movie, because it's like, this atheist guy gets it. Like, some of you guys like, yeah, if I was rich, man, I would buy a private jet, I would buy a Lamborghini, blah blah blah. It's like, dude, I'm not a big fan of calling attention to myself. If I had unexhaustible wealth, or even just like millions of dollars that, I didn't think I was ever going to get around to spending, I would totally buy a Gutenberg Bible. And then you know what I would do with it? I would encase it in cedar, and I would bury it 10 feet down in my backyard. Nobody would ever find it. And I would take that secret to my grave. Like, to have a Gutenberg Bible, there's like a handful of them out there, and they're millions of dollars. They're very expensive. But I thought that was such a beautiful scene, because that atheist understood. Like, this is the the reason that we have books is because of this guy named Gutenberg. That's why. And the first thing off of the printing press was the Bible, that had just been translated by Martin Luther into German. And guess what the second thing off of the printing press was? Everything else that Martin Luther wrote. So here comes this gift from God. Right? I mean, if you can't see the supernatural relevance of the printing press, then I need to get a whole lot better at explaining stuff. And illustrating what's in my head. But that device changed the world for the better and for the worse. But it changed the world, and it can never go back. Right? And the very first thing off of that press, like that machine came along at precisely the time. At exactly the time when Martin Luther had just finished translating the Bible into German. And then everything else that like the first thing off of the printing press was the Bible, according to Martin Luther. And guess what the second thing off of the printing press was? Everything else that Martin Luther wrote. Martin Luther, the guy that saved the world, the reason why you and I are not all Catholics right now, it's because of that guy. And God gave that machine to him. He said, here you go, Gutenberg, here's this idea. I'm going to download this information into your head. Now, go talk to Martin Luther. The reason that happened, the reason why the printing press and the knowledge of architecture and the way we approach music and the way we approach the written word and the way we approach food, the way that we approach medicine, the way that we approach the elements, the periodic table, the way that we approach all of that stuff. And this can be evidence in guys like Sir Isaac Newton, guys like Benjamin Franklin and all of his buddies. You can see evidence of this, is that because of Christianity and what Christianity demands of the followers of Jesus Christ, is that we approach things, the sciences, by trying to put on the mind of God. Or another way of saying that is to make our brain like a stringed instrument and try to get God to drag his bow across our strings, is the way that scientists would think about this. Men of science and women of science who would think about architecture or food or medicine or whatever it is that they were thinking about, science to those men and women was literally, I'm going to try to think God's thoughts and then produce those thoughts once I have them. That's what science. There was no difference between science and art. There was the same approach. People mixed colors to put on a canvas with the same mindset that an architect would try to figure out the rules of setting a foundation. I'm trying to think God's thoughts. Let my mind be the instrument and let God drag the bow across the strings of my mind, and whatever the music that comes out, that's going to be whatever reality that we're going to create, be it a building or a plate of food or a medicine or something like that. And why do Christians think that? Well, because Paul wrote in 1 Corinthians 2:16. See, there was a time when Christian people actually believed the Bible. Weird, huh? Now, I make a lot of jokes about I'm so old that I remember this, or I'm so old that I remember. Guess what? I'm not old enough to remember that. None of us are. But I can assure you with historic evidences that there used to be a time when mankind, as it applies to Christian people, they would actually read the Bible and believe what it said. And they believed the words of Paul, for example. They believed the words of Isaiah. And Paul wrote, let's see here, Berean, King James. Let me just read you the King James. He wrote, "For who has known the mind of the Lord?" And it's, by the way, it's significant to point out when it says the mind, that phrase, of the Lord. I'm not going to get into it right now, but the in Greek, the way that's written, it's kurios, and there's only a handful of places that's found in the Bible, and it's all consistent with one thing, is that we're talking about the Most High God. Who has known the mind of the Lord? Well, so that, or well enough that he may instruct him, being the Lord. Right? Which one of you is saying that you've known the mind of the Lord? Huh? Paul says. You think you're going to instruct God? Which one of you knows the mind of the Lord? And then there's a very audacious statement right after that question is posed. He says, but we have the mind of Christ. Right? He says, you don't know the mind of God. I do. Paul writes, right? The mind of Christ. We have the mind of Christ. The living Logos. The Word of God, the Logos. If you go back to the very beginning of the Gospel of John, in the beginning was the Logos. And the Logos was with God. And the Logos was God. And the Logos became flesh and walked amongst us. And Paul is saying here, but we have the mind of the Logos, the chosen one. We have his mind. And so Christianity in Europe, they looked at this thing and they're like, oh. I think I dig what Paul's saying here. He's saying that that's what he pursues. He wants to think God's thoughts. He wants to think, like when God has a thought, and it goes through God's, neural pathways, I want to plug my mind into that, and I want to feel God's thoughts going through my brain the way a bow goes over a stringed instrument. And then I want to learn how to make it make pretty sounds. That the sound of this music is going to be a building that I'm going to call the Chapel of Notre Dame. Or the Dome in Cologne, Germany. Or Romeo and Juliet by William Shakespeare. Or The David by Michelangelo. Or, you know what I mean? I could sit here and just go, example after example after example. But that's why Europe changed that quickly and that across the board. And people would sit down and think like, oh, okay, God requires that we eat food. Ideally, 2 or more times a day. I understand this. And so I want to think what God thinks about food. And so I will take this piece of beef and I'll cut some holes in it and I'll stuff it with blue cheese and garlic. And I'll call it Chateaubriand. I'll even give it a very sexy French name. So that even the name is delightful. As well as the taste and the smell. That's literally, that happened. Because people back then, they approached the arts, the culinary arts, architecture, literature, music, everything became art and science. The art and the science was, you know what I mean? It was the pursuit of logos, because the Apostle Paul spent so much time talking about, the whole thing here with this Jesus, that he came and he died and he was resurrected and poured his spirit out. This was the Logos, and we can have it. He came to deliver this to us, and it happened across Europe, and took these savages, these barbarians and these Gauls and these Goths and these people, and transformed them into the smartest people on the planet, who made the most beautiful things the planet's ever known. And out of the pursuit of the mind of God, out of the pursuit of the Logos, came Notre Dame. And it burned down yesterday, damn it. Anyways, that's a story. I'm sad. Look, there's other things I could be talking about. Bernie Sanders made an ass of himself yesterday. He went to a Fox News town hall, which is, you gotta give him props for that. Walking right into the lion's den out of there, Bernie. Anyways, there's a bunch of stuff to discuss, but I don't want to lose it. I'm dedicating this whole episode to that building, because we all lost something that is not replaceable. Whereas the Christianity that has been lost in Europe, particularly France, that is replaceable. It doesn't matter that that whole nation has turned its back on God. There is still a remnant. There is still a remnant in France. There are still devout people who love the Lord in France. And God protects those people. There has never been a point at any point in this saga that is 2,000 years long. There's never been a point where the people of God have been in danger. Our master defeated death. We are in no danger. So I just say that because there's going to be a lot of people speculating like, oh, somebody else burned this down. Yeah, probably. Maybe. I don't know. At this point, I might chime in on this at another point, but at this point it's like, well, let's just take a moment to mourn the loss before we start pointing fingers and putting on our tinfoil hats. We lost something. And we'll never get it back. Christianity, on the other hand, it's like, now France is beginning to wake up. And not because of this, but because, they're starting to see like, oh, that whole thing about like we killed God. We got smarter than God. We got so smart that we no longer need God. It's like, yeah, friends, how's that working out for you? Because you've got a whole group of people who believe in a very different God, and they believe in him very much. Very much. You sure? You sure you don't believe in God there, sweetie? Okay. I mean, more for me. You want to give up your land, that's just more for me. My master is returning. And rumor has it. My master is returning. You want to forfeit your land, that's just more for me. You can sit there and bathe in your own self-righteousness all you want. But you are being subdued by a people of a different God to such a degree that the Most High God is going to come down and smack the shit out of his enemies once again. And it always happens. And when he's done, there's going to be a lot of available land. And guess what? Old Petey real estate speculation's going to make a return. No, I'm just kidding. It's looking at the burning down of Notre Dame. This is the significance of like, I do not, says the Lord, I do not, I take no joy in the destruction of the wicked. When God destroys people, and he does destroy people, violently, brutally, God destroys people. And when he does, he says, I don't take any joy in this. And you want to know why? Because it's like the burning down of Notre Dame. It's like, look, you could be an atheist or just like a non-Catholic. I'm not Catholic. You could look at that and be like, well, that's the Catholics thing, and I don't like Catholicism or whatever. And Catholic priests are a bunch of pedophiles. You can say that, but it's like, dude, you're talking about a beautiful work of art. You may have never been to Notre Dame, whatever. You may have never been there. You may think nothing of Catholics. You may think all, but in your heart, it's like, oh man, a beautiful piece of art was ruined. That's how God feels when he has to kill people. He thinks, oh man, I worked really hard on this, man. It took 7,000 years of human history to produce you. He does not want to destroy you. It took a lot of work. It took a lot of work to get you here. He doesn't want to destroy you any more than you want to see Notre Dame burning down. It's like, oh man. Anyways, that's the show for today. Hey, send me money, would you? My birthday's like in 4 days. Eek. Passover this year. Passover. Oh, you guys had everybody had tax day yesterday. Except me. Tax day was yesterday. Sorry, everybody. It's a pretty bad week to remind you to support the show, huh? Good Friday's on this Friday, and then Passover is on my birthday. So it's going to be kind of an expensive week for a lot of you guys. But hey, if you want to support the show, I am being systematically censored, so if you would send me some dough, would you? Arch Advocate, that's paypal.me/archavocate, paypal.me/archavocate, if you want to support the show. And if you don't want to do that, would you please, for the love of crepes, you ever had crepe? They're delicious. For the love of crepes, would you please send me some money at paypal.me/archavocate. Dude, Cinco de Mayo is on... that's on Sunday this year, and May the 4th be with you. It's on a Saturday. Earth Day is on the 22nd. No, it's not. Earth Day is always on the 20th. Why? Look, they put Earth Day on Monday the 26th. This is so stupid. Earth Day is 4/20. And what's better is, like, you have it on Saturday. Why have you chosen to do Earth Day on the 22nd this year, you hippie, soy, latte drinking... Anyways, that's enough of that. Hey, you guys, I will talk to you tomorrow. How's that? Tomorrow is Wednesday. Oh, let me read your devotional. I'm sorry I've skipped a number of these. I'm sorry about that. My own faithlessness. April 16th. I am calling you to a life of thankfulness. I want all of your moments to be punctuated with thanksgiving. The basis for your gratitude is my sovereignty. I am the creator and controller of the universe. Heaven and earth are filled with my glorious presence. When you criticize or complain, you are acting as if you think you could run the world better than I do. From your limited human perspective, it may look as if I'm mismanaging things, but you don't know what I know or see what I see. If I pulled back the curtains to allow you to view the heavenly realms, you would understand much more. However, I have designed you to live by faith and not by sight. I lovingly shield you from knowing the future or seeing into the spirit world. Acknowledge my sovereignty by giving thanks in all circumstances. Amen. That's the show for today, and I will talk to you tomorrow.